We are on Daf Lamed Beis, Amid Beis, about 7 lines from the bottom. Ufa. Now, this was a statement that we sort of did quickly, but the Gemara is going to go through it and explain it properly. And it's a very Yisaitis Daf. It's very interesting. The Gemara says, Gufa, we had this statement yesterday. Rav Shimon ben Lakish. Rish Lakish says as follows. Shachet es hakana. There's two pipes. If you cut the trachea, which is the wind pipe, which is connected to the lungs, the second you cut that pipe, let's say that's the first pipe you cut, so middle shchita, and then in middle of the shchita, there's a puncture in the lungs. Now, how do you know it happened at that moment? I don't know. You saw it. I don't know. You got shot in the lungs, whatever it is. So you cut the trachea, and then in between cutting the trachea and the esophagus, the lung was punctured. So normally a punctured lung is a treifa. But over here, in between cutting the trachea and the esophagus, you had a punctured lung. Zak Rish Lakish Kshera. It's kosher. Now that is what Rish Lakish said. Now Rish Lakish did not explain himself, but it's understood the way Rava explains Rish Lakish. There's two ways you could understand Rish Lakish. You could understand Rish Lakish that basically Rish Lakish is telling you that as long as you cut one pipe, you no longer can have a treifa. But that's not the accepted psak. The understanding of Rish Lakish really is that when you cut the trachea, because the trachea is connected to the lungs, the second you cut the trachea, you're disconnecting the trachea and the lungs from the rest of the body. In other words, trachea, think of it like, look at it removed, like AI, picked and gone. So I don't care that a puncture happens to the lungs. Once you cut the trachea and everything it's connected to is out. That would mean, though, if after cutting the trachea, the intestines get punctured, that would be treifa because the intestines are not connected to the trachea. That is the understanding of Rava. So says Rava, Rava, Loy Rish Lakish El Bereya. Rish Lakish only said this concept that if a puncture happens between cutting the trachea and the esophagus, that it's not a treifa. That's only true if there was a puncture in the lungs. Hoyel v'chaya reya tzluya bekana. But if there was a puncture in the intestines, then that would be a treifa. Meaning, Rish Lakish is not being mechadish that once you cut one siman, then you can't have a treifa. He's just saying that the trachea is connected to the lungs. So once you cut the trachea and lungs are out. Okay. Yes. Yeah, it would be the same thing. Correct. Now that's the way Rava understood Rish Lakish, and that is the conclusion of how Rish Lakish is mostly understood. Rav Zera at first did not understand it that way. Rav Zera at first thought that what Rish Lakish meant to say is, once you cut one siman, you no longer can have a treifa. Doesn't matter whether the lungs are punctured, doesn't matter whether the intestines are punctured. Rav Zera understood it that way. To that, Rav Zera asked the question, Maskler Zera, Me'acher shenol duba simane treifa itarta. Rav Zera said to Rava, because he didn't understand Rish Lakish that way, he was understanding that it's all or nothing. So according to him, he says to Rava, I don't understand. What's the difference between a puncture in the lungs or a puncture in the intestines? Once you cut one siman, if you accept this chiddush of Rish Lakish, that once you cut one siman, you no longer can have a treifa, then what does it matter whether you cut the treifa developed in the lungs? Because he didn't understand Rish Lakish the way Rava did. So Maskar Rav Zera said, once you're saying that once you cut one siman, you can't have a treifa, Mali Bereya, Mali B'nei Mayim. What's the difference between lungs and the intestines? Because obviously Rav Zera did not understand Rish Lakish the way Rava did. Now, the Gemara says the truth is Rav Zera eventually rescinded his view, meaning Rav Zera eventually rescinded and understood that if a puncture were to develop after cutting one siman, it could develop a treifa. That it's not this magical heter that after one siman you can't have a treifa. It's dafka because the trachea is connected to the lungs. So although Rav Zera at first thought that there's this magical heter, he eventually rescinded his view. How do I know this? How do I know Rav Zera was chayzer? Because Rav Zera asked the question. Again, Rav Zera was the one who said that according to Rish Lakish, once you cut one siman, there's no such thing as a treifa. Whether it's intestines, whether it's lungs, doesn't matter. The Gemara says Rav Zera rescinded his view. How do I know this? Because Rav Zera asked the following question. And from this question, you could tell that he pulled back his opinion. What was his question? To boy Rav Zera, Nikvu b'nei mayim bein simin l'simin mahu. Okay, this is the questions. You cut after cutting the first pipe, before cutting the second pipe. If there's a puncture in the intestines, he wanted to know what is the halacha. Now, Rav Zera just got finished saying that after you cut one pipe, there's this magical heter that it's not going to be a treifa. But that's not his question. His question is the animal a treifa or a nevela? That was his question. Now pause. I'll explain what his question is in a moment. But the very fact that he's asking whether it's a treifa or a nevela, mutter is not on the table. So obviously he was choser. Obviously he rescinded his view because this question doesn't make sense. Again, his view at first was that once you cut one siman, there's no such thing. It's kosher. A treifa wouldn't be a problem. Now he's saying if a puncture develops in the intestines after one pipe, his question is it a treifa or a nevela? So obviously he retracted his view of it being kosher because the very question itself implies a retraction. Now, what is the question based on? Whether it's a treifa or a nevela? So I'll tell you like this. Normally when you shecht an animal, right? Normally when an animal dies without shechita, it's a nevela. And as we said yesterday, a nevela has tuma. But we do know that shechita does two things. Every animal, when you shecht an animal, it accomplishes two things. Number one, it accomplishes that you could eat the animal. Now kosher. Number two, it accomplishes that it removes the tumas nevela. That's what every shechita does. It just happens at the same time. Here's the question over here. He's asking, I cut one pipe. Now, at that moment, when I cut that one pipe, what is that cutting doing? It's accomplishing two things. It's accomplishing removing tumas nevela, and it's allowing me to eat the animal. But then a development, a blemish happens in between, and then I cut the second pipe. What is the second pipe accomplishing? Not the same as the first, because the first is actually accomplishing heter achila. The second is not accomplishing heter achila. It's the only thing it could accomplish is removing tumas nevela, because heter achila is off the table because it already developed a blemish in between the pipes. Rav Zera's question is, if the cutting of both pipes is not accomplishing the same thing, does it remove tumas nevela? The first one is accomplishing, in addition to removing tumas nevela, it's accomplishing a heter achila. But then I developed a blemish in between. So this, when I cut the second pipe, the second pipe cannot be accomplishing heter achila because heter achila is off the table. The only thing the second pipe can do is be mater for nevela. So the first pipe and the second pipe, what you're doing is not accomplishing the same thing. The question is, do we say that doesn't matter? And at the end of the day, you cut both pipes, in which case tumas nevela is removed? Or do you say no? Because cutting of each pipe is doing a separate act, it's accomplishing a separate thing, they're not mitzdarif together. And it's ki'ilu, there's no shechita b'chlal. So he knows you're not going to eat the food. The only question is whether tumas nevela is removed. That's Rav Zera's kasha.
So, man,
Look, when you cut the first pipe, at that moment, there's no blemish. So what you're doing, you're accomplishing is a heter achila. But then after the developed blemish, the intestines get punctured, and then you cut the second pipe is not being mater achila. That's not on the table. The only thing you could do is remove tuma. So because the cutting is not doing the same thing, do we say that matters or it doesn't matter? So who said that one's not over? I said you cut one pipe, then you had to develop a blemish in the intestines, then you cut a second pipe. I didn't say anything about Rav. So the point is, when you cut the first pipe, you were accomplishing mater achila. When you cut the second pipe, you were accomplishing removing tuma. The question is, do we say, listen, I don't care about this. This is, as you said, semantics. You cut both pipes, tuma's removed. Or do you say, no, technically each pipe was accomplished a different thing. They're not mitzdarif together. In which case, tumas nevela was not removed. That was Rav Zera's question.
does it move tuma or prevents?
So I understand the question. I hear, maybe it's totally not. So says the Gemara, that was the question that Rav Zera asked. So the Gemara says, V'amrinan, Lav Haini By Ilfa, and they responded. It happens to be this was Ilfa's kasha. What was Ilfa's kasha? Ilfa's kasha is very, very incredibly similar. When you shecht a mommy cow and has a baby inside, the baby you could eat. The shechita accomplishes for the baby the same thing it does for the mother. It removes tumas nevela and allows you to eat it. Let's say before you shecht, the baby puts its hands out of the womb. It puts its hand out of the womb. The halacha is when you shecht the mother, all it does is remove tumas nevela of the baby. You can't eat the baby without a shechita, but it can remove tumas nevela. That's the halach. Here's the question. You cut the first pipe of the mother, then the baby sticks the hand out. And then you cut the second. The question is tumas nevela removed from the baby? Same thing. When you cut the first pipe, because the baby was inside the womb, what it was accomplishing was heter achila. Then the baby stuck its leg out, and then you cut the second pipe. The second pipe is accomplishing removing tumah. Do you say that because both pipes are being cut and accomplishing different things, they don't mitzdarif together and there's no tumas nevela removed? Or do you say, no, it makes no difference? Mamish the same shayla, but by a baby cow. So he said, Mahu. Mi mitzdarev simin l'rishon l'simin sheni l'tarm de nevelo eloi. Oh, so what do you see from all this? You see that Rav Zera asked the question. You cut the first pipe, and then you developed a puncture in the intestines. And then you cut the second pipe. And his question is the animal tumas nevela or not? Nowhere on the table is he allowing you to eat the food. That's not on the table. Eating the food is out of there. So you see that Rav Zera was chayzer, because again, Rav Zera was the one who said originally that he understood Reish Lakish as saying that when you cut one pipe, you can no longer have a treifa. He clearly doesn't hold that way. This entire question is, the premise of this question is that there is a nevela and there is treifa after cutting one pipe. The Gemara says, says the Gemara, it's not 100% clear that Rav Zera was chayzer. I'll tell you why. Yes, this question is a chazara, but maybe this question was only according to Rava's opinion. Meaning, maybe Rav Zera would say as follows: I hold once you cut one pipe, there's no such thing as a treifa anymore. You could eat the animal. You who says that there isn't, here's my question. So it could be that when he said this shaila, when he asked this question, it wasn't a chazara. He was saying, this is a shaila according to you. To me, it's not a kasha. So it says the Gemara, it's a dichloi. Okay.
Doesn't sound like that.
I know it doesn't sound like it, but it's possible. The Gemara now has a tremendous chiddush. I tell you, this to me is so fascinating. The Gemara has the following chiddush. We said when you cut the trachea, there's no problem with the lungs developing a blemish at that point, because when you cut the trachea, we sort of look at the lungs as if they're removed. Now, I thought of that as like conceptually. The Gemara says, no, we look at it as if the lungs are removed. And that would also mean that, let's say I cut the esophagus first. We look at the intestines as if they're removed. You know what the halacha is then? A guy can't eat the intestines because it's Avim and Achai. Let me explain. We paskin, for us, Jews and non-Jews are not allowed to eat Avim and Achai, which is a limb from a living animal. So how are we allowed to eat limbs? So we hold shchita. If a Jew cuts the pipes of the esophagus and the trachea, the animal could be jerking around. You could reach into the animal and take a bite out of its leg, even though the animal's moving. Because the Torah says, v'shachat, Jews are dictated by shchita. Goyim are not dictated by shchita. Goyim are dictated by the death of the animal, by the animal stopping to move. Which would mean that if you shech the animal, and while it's moving around, the guy were to grab a limb, that would be a problem. You say, okay, so just wait till it to die. But here's the thing, if the second you shech the animal, we look at the esophagus and trachea as if they're removed, and we look at the intestines and the lungs as if they're removed while the animal's still moving around, that means halachically, it's as if the intestines were removed from a living animal, from the perspective of a guy. So that means that when you shecht an animal, Jews can eat the intestines, but not goyim, ever. Goyim can never eat the intestines of a shechted animal. The only time they could eat it is if the animal died without movement. You went in and shot in the head. Because when you shoot in the head, there's no more jerking movement. But when... But that's the point. But that you told me that when you cut the esophagus, it's as if at that moment the intestines are removed. That means it's as if the intestines are removed from a living animal. You see, and you'll say, how do you know it's living? Because the animal's still moving around. You see, if you go over to the animal, shoot in the head, it's dead. There's no, it's as if it's removed. But when you cut it, it's as if you removed it. You removed it from a living animal because the animal's still jerking around. You only cut one pipe. So that means that the intestines, every time you shecht an animal, the intestines are Avim and Achai from the perspective of Goyim. Now again, not from our perspective.
Going to his own square, like here, and cuts off the
Yeah, correct.
And the animal then dies.
Yeah.
That piece
Correct. It's Avim and Achai, correct.
Avim and Achai.
Correct. Yeah, yes. Avim and Achai. Rav Acha bar Yaakov, Shema mina mid Reish Lakish. According to Reish Lakish, we have a chiddush. What's Reish Lakish's chiddush? Mizamni yisol b'nei mayim ve'mizamri v'chom b'nei mayim. If you shecht an animal, the Jews can eat the intestines, but not goyim. Why? My timer. Yisrael de b'shchita talim milsa. For a Jew to eat the intestines, to make it not Avim and Achai, all you have to do is shecht the animal and kivan d'ikar shchita ma'alaisa. And once you shecht 2 pipes, ishtarileh, you're allowed to eat it. I don't care that the animal's jerking around. I don't care. The second you cut when you cut it, it's as if they're removed and the animal's still moving. Yeah, but it's a shchita. The second you shech the animal, that's it. It's done. From the halachic perspective, it's dead. But goyim, don't believe in shchita. They don't have shchita. What do they have? They have killing the animal. So from a guy's perspective, when could you eat the Eva Menachai? When is Eva Menachai removed? When the animal is dead at a doorstop on the ground. Here's the problem: when you shecht it, the animal's still moving around, but we look at the intestines as if they're removed. So it's as if our intestines are removed from a living animal. Now this is a tremendous chiddush. That would mean that you have something that Jews can eat, but goyim cannot eat. That's a very rare thing. So the Gemara says, Rav Papa said, I was sitting before Rav Yaakov when he said this ruling. And I wanted to raise my hand and ask the following question in shir. Is there such a thing that a Jew is allowed to eat, but a guy can't? I mean, for a Jew, it's not treif, but for a guy, it's treif. We find such a thing. But I didn't raise my hand. Why? Because I said, high time a He's good. He's giving a good svara. You're right. It doesn't make sense to me. Meaning it's a rare thing. But okay, if it makes sense, it makes sense. Listen, it's like it's a chiddush. Where do we find that something that a Jew says is mutter for a Jew, but guy is usher? Okay, but he's saying a good svara. Tanya Deloy Kirvach Yaakov. But the truth is, we have a brisa not like this. We have a brisa that says that if you shecht an animal, you could rip out a part of the animal while it's still jerking around and give it to a guy. So this whole concept that Jews and goyim are dictated differently, and we're following shchita, and by goyim it's totally in death, and if the animal's jerking around, it's no. If we can eat it, a guy can eat it. Tanya Delaker Yaakov, if a person wants to eat meat before the animal officially dies, I mean the animal's still moving around, you want to eat the meat. Apparently, if you take meat from an animal while it's still jerking around, apparently it's very vibrant and it's good meat. So if you want to do this, here's how you do it. You take an olive-sized piece of meat from the place of the incision, because that's the quickest part to get. And you could salt it. You have to salt it, obviously, to remove the blood. By the way, you have to wait for the animal to stop jerking around. It's not even menachai, but there's a separate halacha of you can't eat it while it's still jerking around. It's a marasai, and it's not good. But the point is, you could then eat it. Both a Jew and a guy. So you see that Jews and goyim are the same in this halacha. That shchita removes eva menachai. Rav Idi Barovin, and this also backs up Rav Idi Barovin, who said the same thing. Dam Rav Idi Barovin, Rav Yitzchak Bar Ashian. If a person wants to be healthy, the so this concept of saying that there's a distinction between a Jew and a guy, not so true. We paskin that that's just telling you the quickest place to get.
He just disagrees.
Yeah, it's a Bryce that disagrees. Okay, so new Mishnah. Just one thing you have to remember before we do the Gemara. Two things you have to remember. Number one is that for food to become susceptible to tumah, it has to have come in contact with a liquid that we've had many times. And number two, this is the rules of tum and tahara. A rishon makes a sheni makes a shlishi makes a revi. But on a biblical level, Chullin, sheni is the end of it. There's no such thing as a shlishi by Chullin. Chullin, that's not a thing. Shlishi on a biblical level exists for two things. Meaning, if I'm a sheni and I touch this food, is that a thing? By Chullin, no. Regular food, shlishi doesn't exist. The only time a shlishi exists on a biblical level is for karbanos and for truma. Karbanos and truma. We'll see meisers and machloikas. But karbanos and truma. And then a shlishi can make a revi'i for kachim. So you understand that? That's the one thing you got to remember. Shlishi does not exist by Chullin. It exists by Truma and Karbanos, and a Revi only exists by Karbanos. Meaning, if I'm a Shlishi and I touch Truma, that's fine. A Revi, because that would make a Revi. A Revi only exists by Karbanos, but a Shlishi exists by Karbanos and by Truma as well. Okay, let's do the Mishnah. The Mishnah says like this. If you shecht a behema, a chaya, or an oif, and I don't know how this happens scientifically. You shecht a bird, no blood comes out. No blood comes out. You shecht an animal, no blood comes out. The halacha is ksherim, you can still eat it. Meaning, as long as you cut the pipes, there's no blood, it's kosher. You don't need blood. It's kosher. But zak the Mishnah, but I told you before, for food to become susceptible to tumah, it has to come in contact with a liquid. One of those liquids is blood, but there's no blood here. So therefore, you could eat this food, this behema chayiv oif, with dirty hands. What do I mean dirty hands? When you wash your hands for Natil Zedayim for bread, yeah? What are your status of your hands? Your body is tahar. You're not a tameh guy. Chazal made it that all hands are always a sheni. All hands are always a sheni. It's a takonis chazal. Even though I'm not tameh, and also by the way, the whole concept that your hands are different than your body, it's all takonis chazal. Every hand is a sheni. That's why we wash our hands for bread, because kehanim, sheni doesn't affect the shlishi by chulin. So I'm washing my hands for bread, not for me, because I'm a Yisrael. I'm never eating truma. But kehanim who eat truma can't eat truma as a shlishi. Therefore, your hands are a sheni. So point back to the Mishnah. Behema chayav ha'oif. If blood came out, then that would be an issue, because my hands are a sheni, would make the behema chayav ha'oif a shlishi. But no blood came out, so I can eat my hands. You can eat them with my hands that are dirty. Because it only becomes susceptible to tumah by coming wet with blood, and because no blood came out, it's not susceptible to tumah, so I can eat it with dirty hands. Dirty hands meaning a sheni, even though it would normally render the behema chayv oif shlishi, but no blood came out, so it's tahor. Rav Shimon Omer, he disagrees. He says hukshur b'shchita. He says no. Normally you need a liquid to make it susceptible to tumah. Over here, the shchita itself makes it susceptible to tumah. Why? Because the shchita makes food regarding heter achila, it makes it food regarding susceptibility to tumah. Fine. But let's focus on the Rabbanan Shita. The Rabbanan Shita is like this. Again, this is the point. This is the rest of the daf, is all this. If your hands are tameh, they're sheni, normally you would not be able to eat this behema chayav ha'oif with dirty hands, because it would make it a shlishi. But says the Mishnah, no blood came out. So because no blood came out, it's not susceptible to tumah. It's not a shlishi. Stop. Oh, that's the question. The Mishnah's whole point is that it's fine because no blood came out. Let's say blood did come out. So it makes it a shlishi. I told you a shlishi does not exist by chulin. It exists by karbanos and truma. Is this karbanos or truma? Think of the cases. Behema could be a carbon. Oif could be a carbon. Chaya? There's no karbanos or chayas. There's no truma on animals. So how exactly, what is the Mishnah talking about? Says the Gemara, the whole point of the Mishnah is that no blood came out, and that's why I'm allowed to eat it with dirty hands. But let's go through, let's play the game. Let's say blood did come out. You're not allowed to eat the behema chayva oif with hands that are dirty. Why? So I'm making it a shlishi. So what? Make it a shlishi. There's no such thing as a shlishi by chulin. It doesn't exist. It exists by truma and karbanos. Still say it. Again, karbanos or truma. And it says the Gemara, how do you know that it's not a carbon? Because it says chaya. There's no carbon on a chaya. Chaya is a deer. We don't bring deers as karbanos. It can't be karbanos. But that's the point. I can answer you very simply that we're talking about karbanos. And karbanos, shlishi is a thing. So number one, it says chaya. Number two, the Gemara has another proof. The Gemara has like 4 proofs that this cannot be talking about a chaya. Number one, karbanos. Number one, it says chaya. Number two, v'su, ibekadshim kilayas mendam kshera hu asma dahamutzar. By the way, also let's play the game. Could you read this Mishnah as talking about a carbon? What's the case of the Mishnah? I shecht an animal, no blood comes out, it's still kosher. Karbanos need blood. That's the whole point. If you shecht a chatas and no blood comes out, it is not kosher. The whole point is you need blood. So it can't be talking about carbon because the halacha itself does not apply karbanos. Number 3, another proof it can't be talking about karbanos. V'su, ibekadshim kiyatzim edam mimachsher. Number 3 is, by the way, the whole premise of the Mishnah is that there's no blood. That's why the food is not susceptible to tumah. Blood would make food susceptible to tumah, not by karbanos. Blood does not make karbanos susceptible to tumah. Why? Because the source, shenemar al haaretz tishbechenu kamayim, the pasuk that describes blood making something susceptible to tumah says the blood spills on the floor. By karbanos, blood doesn't spill on the floor. You spill it on the mizbeach. Therefore, blood does not make food susceptible to tumah when it's blood of a carbon. Karbanos are susceptible to tumah by the very fact that they're chashiv, that they're karbanos, not because of blood. Blood does not make karbanos susceptible to tumah. Blood makes chulin susceptible to tumah because the source that blood makes something susceptible to tumah, it says ala aretz b'shevchenu kamayim, because the blood spills on the floor like water. That's not a reference to karbanos. The Gemara says, "Dam shenishbach kamayim machsher shenishbach kamayim eno machsher." Blood only makes food susceptible to tumah, not by karbanos. If blood gets on a chatas, it's not susceptible to tumah because of the blood.
So forget about the fact that what hurt.
Correct. It's
But to that aside, the blood itself doesn't make it susceptible.
correct. Correct. So the case of the Mishnah doesn't work. It can't be karbanos because the whole point of the Mishnah is that it's not susceptible to them because there's no blood. Had there been blood, it would be. That's not true. A fourth proof, it's not talking about karbanos. Vesu, iba kachim. If it's talking about a kachim, ki lo yatzim edam lo miskashri luskashri bechibas hakodesh. Tikam bechibas hakodesh machshartam. By the way, also can't be talking about karbanos. Karbanos doesn't need water or blood to make susceptible to tumah. The chashivas of the fact that it is a carbon is enough. So in other words, we've now proven 4 proofs that the Mishnah is not talking about karbanos. So let's review the question. We are dealing with a question, and this is going to take us. Into tomorrow. Into tomorrow's daf. Basically, it's like this: the Mishnah says you have a behema chayv oif that you shecht and no blood comes out. So it says you could eat it with dirty hands. Why? Because your hands are a sheni. Normally, it would make it a shlishi, but no blood came out, so it's not susceptible to tumah. I don't understand. Shlishi is only a thing by truma and karbanos. This case is not talking about truma or karbanos. It's talking about Chullin. So if it's talking about Chullin, why do you have to tell me that it's not an issue? Because no blood came out. Even if blood did come out, it's not an issue. There's no such thing as a shlishi by Chullin. Shlishi exists by karbanos, which our Mishnah says chaya, so it's not karbanos, and truma. There's no truma by animals. So says the Gemara, I'll tell you there is a shlishi according to one opinion. I said shlishi exists not by Chullin, but it exists by karbanos. It's not a carbon. Truma, it's not truma. Meiser sheni. According to one opinion, shlishi exists by meiser sheni. So I'll tell you the case. I have meiser sheni money that I use to buy this animal. Chayv oif, behema chayv oif. So you have to eat in Yerushalayim. So meiser sheni, according to one opinion, you could have shlishi invalidating meiser sheni, and that's the case of behema chayv oif. Says the Gemara, and over here we're talking about behema chayv oif that were purchased with meiser sheni funds, which means they have the laws of meiser sheni. And according to the Rabbanon, meiser sheni does become invalid by a shlishi. Udeloiker Rav Meir, but this is unlike Rav Meir, who believes that a shlishi only exists for truma and carbon, not for meiser. Go to the next page. Titanan. Kol haton bias mayim b'divrei seifrim. Anything that is a sheni, rabbinically, i.e., hands. Metames hakodesh u'poisel a truma. It makes a revi'i. It'll make a kodesh a shlishi. It'll make truma a shlishi. Umuter b'chulin of a meiser, but meiser sheni does not. Shlishi is not a thing. That's Rameir's talking. The chachamim oisim b'meiser. The chachamim say no. Meiser sheni does become invalid by a shlishi. So our Mishnah is talking about a meiser sheni. That's why you normally are not allowed to eat it with dirty hands, because the hands which are sheni will make the food shlishi, but there's no blood came out, so it's not susceptible to tumah. That's explanation number 1. Now Gemara has one quick point. So we're saying over here, my hands are sheni. I have a chicken, which I purchased with meiser sheni funds. So normally I would not be allowed to eat this chicken. Or, by the way, feed this chicken to you because my hands are a sheni, making it a shlishi, which is a problem. Because the Rabbanan said shlishi is an issue by meiser sheni. But the Mishnah says it's fine because no blood came out, so it's not susceptible to tumah. The Gemara says maybe the Rabbanan, I don't know why they would do this. Maybe the Rabbanan only believe that shlishi is an issue when your hands are dirty if you end up eating it. So you pick it up with your hands and put it in your mouth. But if you just take it with your hands, maybe it's not a problem. Now, we normally do not see a distinction between touching and eating, but maybe because this whole thing is a chumrah by meiser sheni, maybe they only said their halacha by eating, not by touching. Our Mishnah says it's a problem merely by touching. How do you know our Mishnah follows the chachamim? And it's talking about meiser sheni, and that's why it will be a problem by a shlishi. Maybe the Rabbanan are only machmir when you eat it as a sheni. But merely touching it with your hands, maybe it's fine. And how do I know our Mishnah is talking about even touching is an issue? Because it says the Mishnah says you're allowed to eat it with dirty hands, meaning I could feed it to someone with dirty hands, implying that touching alone would normally be an issue. So maybe it's not the chachamim, because over here it's a problem merely by touching, not by eating. Okay, so we're back to the original problem. Original problem is like this. The Mishnah says I'm allowed to eat a behema chayv oif with no blood came out because it's not susceptible to tumah, but normally I would not allow to eat them with my hands. The problem is hands are a sheni. You should be able to eat it with the hands that are sheni because it'll make the food a shlishi. Shlishi is not a problem by Chullin. So our first attempt was at his meiser sheni. The Gemara says a different answer. You could have hands.
First attempt was there.
No, we got that was like a not even no, it wasn't even an attempt. That was the first answer of the Gemara was that we're talking about Maisa Sheni funds. The Gemara said a different answer. Who says your hands are a Sheni? So I say because hands are generally a Sheni. There is one instance where hands could be a Rishon. One instance. So our mission is talking about the one occurrence, meaning when you walk around throughout the day, you want to have bread. You wash your hands for Natil Zidayim. The reason why you're washing your hands is because your hands are generally a sheni. That's Takanas Chazal, all hands are a sheni. There is one instance where your hands could be a rishon. As we'll see in a moment, it's if I stuck my hands into a house with saras. So I didn't go in. If I went in, I'm entirely tummy. I stuck my hands into a house with saras, and Chazal hold that if you stick your hands into a house with saras, they made your hands a rishon. So our Mishnah is talking about that. Because a Rishon could definitely make a Sheni by Chullin. That's true. The whole problem was that it's a Sheni, and a Sheni can't make a Shlishi by Chullin. The answer is your hands are Rishon. When are your hands a Rishon? You stuck your hands into a house with Saras. The Gemara says, we're talking about the hands that are Rishon. Who is the one who said that your hands could be a Rishon? Rav Shimon ben Elazar. Titania, ein yadayim tchilos l'chulin. Your hands can never be a Rishon, says the Brisa. Rav Shimon ben Elazar oimer, Mishum Rav Meir, Yadayim Tchilas l'chulin b'shnias l'trum. Rav Shimon ben Elazar says your hands could be a rishon for chulin and a sheni for truma. Now, what is just before we address what the words mean? It's a rishon and a sheni. How could it be both? So the Gemara says Tchilas l'chulin in l'truma loy hachi gomer. Tchilas af l'chulin shnias l'truma in l'chulin loy. What it means is normally your hands are a sheni, but your hands could be a rishon. Now, Rav Shimon ben Elazar does not say what the circumstance is. What is the circumstance that your hands could be a rishon? And that's what our Mishnah is talking about. Your hands are a rare occurrence that they're a rishon. So if they touch food, that makes the food a sheni, which is always a problem. But because there's no blood, the food's not susceptible to tumah. So Shimon Elazar was the one who's mechadesh. Your hands could be a rishon. He didn't say the case though. So says the Gemara, what's the case of Shimon Elazar? In the Tanan, it's the case of the following Mishnah. Hichnis yadav beis hamenuga. You stick your hands into a house with saras. So you don't go in, you just stick your hands into the window. Yadayim tchilos, diver Rav Akiva. The Rabbanan say that they're sheni because they believe there's no such thing as hands being a rishon. Comes Rav Akiva and he says, no, your hands are rishon. So you stick your hands into a house with saras. Everyone agrees partial entry is not considered entry because if it's considered entry, your entire body is tummy. They both agree that partial entry into a house with saras is not a biblical entry. But Chazal do not like sticking your hands into a house of tzaras. It's a bad idea. The question is, how strict were Chazal? The Rabbanan say, Chazal generally make hands a sheni, so your hands are a sheni. Rav Akiva says, no. You stick your hands into a house of tzaras, you become a rishon. That's what the halacha would be if you enter the house, so they penalized you that your hands are rishon. The Gemara says, Dekuli alma bia b'mixes lo yishma bia. Everyone agrees that partial entry into a house of tzaras is not considered full entry, because if it was considered full entry, you'd be entirely tamei, not just your hands. The question is, what was the penalty of sticking your hands in? The Rabbanan feel the penalty is that your hands are normally a sheni, so they're a sheni this time. Rabbi Akiva says, no. If you were to enter the house entirely, you'd be a rishon. Your hands are a rishon. Penalty. Fine. The point is, our Mishnah is talking about a case where your hands are a rishon, and it's following Rav Shimon Elazar, who was mechadish that this is a thing, and the case is Rav Akiva. One quick point, and we'll end with this. Here's the question. Again, the flow is, the case of our Mishnah is a rishon. Who's the one who said your hands can be a rishon? Rav Shimon Elazar. What's the case? Rav Akiva's case. So just say Rav Akiva. Like you said, it follows Rav Shimon Elazar who's mechadish that it could happen, but the case that he was referring to is Rav Akiva. So say Rav Akiva. And why is it better? Because it's cool ali but the Rav Akiva. It's always good to go with Rav Akiva if you can. But look at Rav Akiva, Daf Yomi tchilas havin. Why are you saying it's Rav Shimon Elazar? And it's the case of Rav Akiva, just say it's Rav Akiva. Skip the step. The Gemara says, Dilma ki ka'amer Rav Akiva hani mili betruma v'kachim dechamiri. Avachulim shniyas havin. Or Rav Akiva said that your hands are a rishon. Maybe he was only referring to regard truma. Meaning, Rav Akiva was just saying your hands are rishon when you stick your hands into Hasid Saras. I don't know if he means that it's a rishon for all halachas. Maybe it's only a rishon regarding truma. Meaning that if you touch truma, the truma is a sheni. But I don't know if he would be strict that I'm a rishon for everything. Comes or Shimon Elazar, he said you sort of put it together. Rav Akiva is the one who says that it's a rishon, but I don't know if he applies it to all cases. Shimon Elazar was the one who said he applies it to all cases. Now, just to end off, The Gemara says, quick point, and this is a question in general. Our whole question is based on the following premise. A sheni does not make a shlishi for chulin. That's been the whole premise. And therefore, our Mishnah said that you could eat chicken that was shechted without blood, with dirty hands, even though hands are normally a sheni, because the chicken didn't have blood, so it's not susceptible to tumah. So we said, I don't understand. A sheni doesn't make a shlishi. So we had our first answer is that it's meiser. The second answer is that you stuck your hands into a tzaras and it falls over kiva. Quick question. This whole premise that a sheni doesn't make a shlishi, that's not universally accepted. Rav Akiva shita is that it does. So you're instead of looking for these random cases, just stam. Say your hands are dirty and they're tamei chazal. All hands are always tamei. They're a sheni. I'm allowed to touch chicken because there's no blood. But if there would be blood, it's a problem. I don't understand. That makes it a shlishi. I thought shlishi is not a thing by chulin. The answer is, according to Rav Akiva, it is. Just say that. The Gemara says, Rav Akiva shita is that there is a shlishi for chulin. The Mishnah says, the pasuk says that if there's a sheretz in a klicheres, so that means a klicheres is a rishon, the food is a sheni. And the pasuk says yitma, not that it's tamei, it shall contaminate. A sheni will make a shlishi for chulin. So the Akiva shita is that you could have a shlishi for chulin. So if that's true by a sheretz, it's probably true by your hands as well. So why are we looking for all these roundabout cases? Go very simple. Your hands are tamei. Chazal made all hands tamei as a sheni. If it touches chicken, it would make the chicken a shlishi, and that's a problem generally. Except no blood, so it's not hachshav or tumah. Just very simple. So the Gemara answers one with this: the mehani mili b'tumah deraisa. The Rabbanon like Rabbi Akiva only said his shita that a shlishi is a thing for chulin when the origin of the tumah is doraisa, like a sheretz, like a nida, like a tamei mace. But over here, when it's hands, which are complete chachamim creation, there is no shlishi. Shlishi is only a thing for chulin when the origin of the tumah is doraisa, like a sheretz. Sheretz touches this, which touches this, which touches this. So that's a shlishi for chulin because the origin of the tumah is doraisa. But our Mishnah is talking about hands. Hands that are tameh is a takonas chazal. Chazal only made the tumah of a sheni, not to create a shlishi by chulin. Even Rav Akiva, who says that a shlishi could be that there is a shlishi for chulin, that's only when the origin of the tumah is deraisa, not by yadayim, which the origin of the tumah is only derabbanan.